Thank you for joining us tonight for a book talk with Dr. Renee Exelbert. My name is Deborah Litwack. I am part of Shar Sharrett's outreach and education team. And tonight's program is in partnership with the Mid-Island YJCC, a not-for-profit community center that offers programs that support wellness and adaptive living. Thank you to Barbara Sachs-Trena from the JCC who could not join us this evening. And a special thank you to Maidenbaum, who is a sponsor of Shar Sharrett's Long Island education and outreach programs. 2 items to note: you were muted when you came in. Please keep yourself on mute got somebody else joining us. Please keep yourself on mute throughout the call, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Exelbert, and we will give you that. If you have questions throughout, you can put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get a chance to get them. Like that. Okay. This program from the JCC is being offered in recognition of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So let me take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Shar Sharret, the Jewish breast and ovarian cancer community. Shar Sharret is a national not-for-profit organization that provides culturally meaningful support to women and their families of all Jewish backgrounds. We support individuals at increased genetic risk and those facing breast or ovarian cancer before diagnosis, during treatment, and into survivorship. Shar Sharret is Hebrew for link or chain, and we make connections. Our team of 11 social workers and a genetic counselor provide confidential, free, and highly personalized support to women, men, and families all over the country. Through outreach and education, we also connect with healthcare and other professionals, as well as students on college and high school campuses. If you are new to Shar Sharret, I will tell you that we have been providing telehealth services to the breast and ovarian cancer communities for over 20 years. One of our many programs to help women and their families navigate their cancer experience is our Genetics for Life program. As part of the program, you can speak one-on-one with our certified genetic counselor about your family history, concerns about cancer risk, and the implications of genetic counseling and testing for you and your family. You can even gather your family on a call to let us help you communicate with them about your hereditary cancer risk and proactive steps each family member can take. As always, our support services are 100% confidential and 100% free. Now, I am happy to introduce Dr. Renee Exelbert, author of Chemo Muscles: Lessons Learned from Being a Psycho-Oncologist and Cancer Patient, published in February 2020. Renee A. Exelbert, PhD, CFT, is a licensed psychologist and certified elite personal trainer. She received her BS from Cornell University, bless you, and her PhD and her MA and PhD from New York University. Dr. Exelbert is the founding director of the Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change, where she integrates psychotherapy and exercise with a focus on the mind-body connection. Dr. Exelbert is a regular expert media contributor and has appeared in numerous outlets, including Thrive Global, Authority Magazine, The New York Post, Parade Magazine, CNBC, Today, Pop Sugar, and Shape Magazine. Dr. Exelbert maintains a private practice in Manhasset and Nyack, New York, for the treatment of children, adolescents, adults, and families. She is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Applied Psychology at the New York University Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, where she teaches master's level psychology courses. Dr. Exelbert previously served as staff psychologist at the Cancer Center for Kids at NYU Winthrop Cancer Center, working with children and adolescents diagnosed with cancer. Dr. Exelbert currently serves on Shar Sharrett's Long Island Community Advisory Committee, and it has been a real joy getting to know her in preparation for tonight. Welcome, Dr. Exelbert.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so honored to be a part of Sharsharat's link. I'm so pleased to be part of the chain. So thank you so much for having me. I thought that I would begin with a reading from my book. I'm going to read certain chapters, certain pages in the chapters, because I wanted some of you who have not had the experience of cancer to just understand what it feels like. I think my book is pretty raw, and I go into great detail about really personal feelings. So I just wanted to share some of that with you all today. The first chapter is called You Are Not Okay. It's difficult to comprehend that it has been just about 1 year since I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm so aware of the anniversary. Although with this anniversary, the presents that I will receive are quite different from the usual presents one associates with anniversaries. It seemed like such a good time in my life. I was and am the mother of 2 wonderful little girls. I had just left a hospital where I had worked for 5 years as a psychologist for a pediatric cancer center. I had seen many miracles, much suffering, and endured the pain and loss of many beautiful children. It was time to leave that world of so much pain and begin to spend more time with my family. It was a decision that my husband and I had grappled with for a few years. Should we try for a 3rd child? I personally struggled with feeling overwhelmed, balancing work and family, and being a good mother to 2 children. I was frightened that having a 3rd child would put me over the edge, so to speak. We finally decided to go for it. I was very aware of my ovulation timing. I was 37 years old and had no family history of breast cancer, but my OBGYN had given me a prescription for a mammogram a few months before, November to be exact. I lost the prescription, but figured I would just ask for another one at my next visit. I wasn't concerned. A baseline mammogram wasn't typically performed until one reaches age 40. I went to the OB on March and merely wanted to make sure everything was in order prior to us attempting to have a 3rd child. On the way out, I asked for a prescription for a mammogram. I called for an appointment as soon as I got home, but the first available appointment wasn't until July. I had it all planned out. It was timed so perfectly. I would get my baseline mammogram out of the way and then try to get pregnant. My mammogram was scheduled for July 2nd, 2007. I still have the instructions in my Palm Pilot. These are now as antiquated as a rotary telephone. No baby powder, no perfume, and arrive at 7:20 a.m. for your 7:40 a.m. appointment. I had never had a mammogram before. I remember registering at the front desk and seeing the pink breast cancer ribbons hanging on the wall. I remember being disturbed by those images. It was a reminder of breast cancer in a site where women were being screened for breast cancer. I remember it bothered me, perhaps because it forced the possibility of disease into my consciousness when it was something that was so far removed from my own reality. The experience of a mammogram is really quite archaic. With all the modern technology, one would think that someone would invent a way of detecting abnormalities that's less barbaric. You literally have to squish your breasts into a machine that flattens them out, making them look like breast patties. It was also painful. I remember telling the technician that I was glad I was having the appointment that day because I was to begin ovulating soon, and I wanted to have my mammogram first to avoid the radiation. She told me that the results would be ready in a few days and advised that I may want to wait to try to get pregnant until after my results came back. That sounded so silly to me. I had no family history of breast cancer. My mother had a long history of having fibrocystic breasts, and in fact, had many scares because of this condition. She even once needed a small lumpectomy because there was concern of something more serious than cystic breasts. However, everything was always fine. With the mammogram now out of the way, the very next morning, I peed on the ovulation stick and found out that I was ovulating. I said to my husband, "Quick, jump aboard, Billy, it's time to make our baby." I somehow knew that I was going to get pregnant immediately, and I also intuited that it was a boy. Within the next few days, I already began to feel pregnant. My stomach gurgled, my breasts began to feel different. I brimmed with excitement. I just knew I was pregnant. Fortunately, I was always blessed in that way and was extremely fertile. I became pregnant with both of my daughters on the first and second attempts. I began to think about how my life was about to change and how our family of 4 was about to become 5. Nearly 1 week later, I received a call from Dr. V, one of my gynecologists. I was driving my car when he called, and I still remember approaching the intersection near my immediate neighborhood. Dr. V told me that he received a preliminary report from the radiologist to examine my mammogram, and there was some concern. He also said that what they saw was not typically indicative of malignancy, but they wanted to check it further. I was alarmed and upset, but remembered that my mother had countless scares because of her fibrocystic breasts. I called Billy immediately, and we tried to calm each other down, both reiterating to one another that my mother had a history of cystic breasts and that I'm probably beginning a series of scares that I'll have to endure for the rest of my lifetime. Dr. V told me to call the radiology center and make the first appointment available for a rescreen. I made my appointment, and I believe it was for 1.5 weeks later. Dr. V called me about 2 days later and told me that I had to go in immediately to have another mammogram. This time, there was a tone of urgency in his voice. I told him that I had made the first available appointment and that I'm certain everything will be okay. After all, my mother had a history of fibrocystic breasts. He told me that he spoke with the radiologist personally and that the radiologist had tremendous concern about my mammogram. Suddenly, the area of suspicion that was not typically indicative of malignancy was urgent. He told me that he had a special number for me where they would be expecting my call and they would schedule me for an immediate appointment. Suddenly, my anxiety level surged. I told Dr. V that there was a chance that I could be pregnant. He told me that I had just as equal a chance of not being pregnant. In order to appropriately decide the next course of action, Dr. V ordered a blood test for me to determine if I was pregnant or not. It was all so fast, a quick blood test and a quick response, life-altering changes in mere hours. Dr. V called me the next day to confirm that I was pregnant. I can still hear his voice saying, "Well, you are pregnant, but we have to see what this is." Suddenly, he was much more grave and pessimistic. I told him that I didn't understand. When he had called me a week ago, he said that what they saw was not typically indicative of malignancy. I didn't understand. How did that change? Why did he sound so concerned? That's not what he said before. Where was all this coming from? He told me that he spoke with the radiologist who called him specifically about me. Apparently, the radiologist was convinced that I had cancer. Okay, just going to read a couple of sections. And this chapter is entitled One Breast or Two. I still had not decided if I was going to have the requisite single mastectomy or prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. There were some studies that showed a minuscule chance of breast cancer spreading to the other breast. My plastic surgeon had discussed that there would also be a lack of symmetry between my breasts had I elected to have the single mastectomy. He commented that they would be sisters rather than twins. 2 days prior to having surgery, I was sent for a final scan of my breasts. My right breast was the one that had the malignancies, however. There was some concern that the cancer might be present in the left breast. The amount of terror I experienced about the possibility of having more cancer was beyond measure. It turned out to be nothing, merely dense breasts. However, my doctor notified me that from this point forward, I would be checked much more frequently in the existing breast. The prospect of experiencing more scares due to dense or cystic breasts was something I could not handle. I decided then and there that I would opt for the prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. It was not an easy choice, as I could have kept one breast and therefore preserved some sense of my existing identity, femininity, and beauty. I had several people close to me, as well as Dr. A, my old boss from the Pediatric Cancer Center, try to convince me that having the bilateral mastectomy was a drastic and unnecessary measure. On the other hand, I had been so freaked out by cancer and the possibility of future trauma that I felt it best to minimize any and all risks. When I arrived for surgery, my surgeon, Dr. M, still had not been notified of my final decision. She asked me in a perfunctory tone, "One breast or two?" as this was her common vernacular and illustrative of surgery that she routinely performed. I couldn't help but be struck by the metaphor to coffee. Would I like 1 lump of sugar or 2? Additionally, Dr. K and Dr. M had asked me if they would be removing a mole that I had between my breasts, as surgery was the perfect time to get rid of it. It was not attractive, but it had become a part of me. I told them that I didn't want to lose any more of me than I needed to, and that I wanted to keep my mole. They both joked with me about how hideous my mole was going to look with my brand new boobs. They made me laugh and brought levity to an agonizing experience. Nonetheless, I'm so glad that I kept my mole. We have been through a lot together. I spent a few final minutes alone with Billy, who gently touched and kissed my boobs. He then said, "Goodbye, guys." We cried and held each other. His unconditional love and acceptance let me know that no matter how the surgery altered my body, he would always love me and find me beautiful. And with that, I was wheeled into surgery. As the anesthesia was administered and I was lying down, terrified for how this next chapter of my life was about to unfold, Dr. M held my hand and supported me. It was such a small gesture, but meant the world to me. You guys still hanging in? I know it's getting very heavy. You still okay? Okay. So this next chapter took place several years later. Actually, no, not yet. This next chapter is called Vegetables, Fruits, and Vitamins. No more Sour Patch Kids. I remember that as soon as I had surgery, my brother was one of the first to visit me. He had also been to the hospital several days prior to my surgery to donate blood in the event that I needed it. Donating blood is certainly an action someone can take to directly give to another human being in need. But the thought that my brother would literally give a part of himself to help me still resonates with me. As soon as he arrived, he handed me a giant bag of gummy bears and Sour Patch Kids. I remember always acknowledging that the best present that I could get from anyone, my sugar soulmate, someone who knew all of my favorite candies: Reese's Pieces, Sour Patch Kids, candy corn gummies, chocolate-covered raisins, and Swedish Fish. The best part was when all of the sugar from the Sour Patch Kids trickled onto everything else. I was a sugar addict and would inject it like heroin. Sugar was connected to warm childhood memories of happiness and reward. However, right after my diagnosis, I had read that sugar feeds tumors. I had this horrible thing growing inside of me, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I thought that if I stopped eating sugar, I could halt its growth. From that moment on, the choices about what I put into my body changed. I would focus only on food that sustained me, nurtured me. I would also practice mantras and visualizations that were connected to food and my physical health. Every time I ingested something healthy, I would tell myself that this food was nurturing and good for me, and that by eating it, I was taking concrete steps towards improving my health. My entire relationship with food changed. Food became my pharmacy: vegetables, brown rice, fruit, nuts, lean meats. This change in cognition is simply about our learned connections and reinforcements from childhood. We're typically rewarded with sugar and taught it's the good stuff. If we change these connections and taught children that healthy food was their reward, or that a strawberry was the real good stuff, children would grow up with different associations to food. When we closely pay attention to our bodies and how our food makes us function and feel, we will find that although sugar gives us that initial high, the corresponding spikes in our blood glucose ultimately result in deficits to our mood as well as to our physical functioning. So this next chapter happens a couple of years later. And so even though I had a double mastectomy and I had less than a 5% chance of recurrence, I'm like a serious overachiever. So I had to go for like the one final push. And unfortunately I had a recurrence. So this next chapter is called Radiation Alone or Chemotherapy. I anxiously awaited the results from my surgery. If there was no lymph node involvement, I would be fortunate to avoid chemotherapy. It was a Friday and Dr. S was going on vacation. I prayed that there was no lymph node involvement. The idea of a more invasive cancer terrified me, as my friend Barbara had died a few years earlier from invasive breast cancer. Additionally, the idea of losing my hair through chemotherapy would really make me feel and look sick. I worried about the ramifications of this on a professional level and how that would be for my patients. I worried about this on a personal level. I wondered how my children and husband would react to seeing me bald. How would I navigate the world as a woman with no hair undergoing chemotherapy? Dr. S called back and said, "You're all good, just radiation." I thought I had won the lottery. How our realities can so easily change. 1 week ago, I had prayed that I didn't have cancer, and now I was praying that I only needed radiation. I was to complete 25 sessions of radiation, driving into the city to go to NYU Monday through Friday for 5 weeks. I had to be tattooed to delineate the parameters for breast radiation that was about to take place. I was told by the radiation oncologist that a small piece of my lung would be exposed to the radiation, which meant that on any future scans, the section of my lung would look black, like a smoker's. It was one of the insidious aftermaths of breast cancer. I remember thinking how unfair this was, that I had never smoked a day in my life, except for the one cigarette I had with my best friend Carolyn when I was 15, and took such painstaking care in nourishing my body and keeping it healthy. It made me really think about the ravages of breast cancer and how my life might be irrevocably altered with unforeseen side effects resulting from my body being radiated. All I could think of was how we routinely go to the dentist to have x-rays done and are shielded from the deleterious effects of the radiation as it's so dangerous. I relayed my concerns to my radiation oncologist, who shared with me that in Ramsar, a northern coastal city in Iran, radiation existed at a very high degree. She said that doctors and scientists had been studying the city for years, as these high levels of natural radiation may have some biopositive effects, such as enhancing radiation protection. Whether this was just a partial truth or not, this reassurance gave me a small level of hope that I desperately needed, and I held on to it to get through the next phase of my treatment. Being tattooed felt particularly traumatizing at the time. Although I had already been irrevocably altered by having my breasts removed through a bilateral mastectomy, something about being tattooed really made me react. I was raised a Jew and was always told that having tattoos would prevent one from being buried in a Jewish cemetery. I already had a form of a tattoo on both breasts, but something about the radiation tattoos felt more invasive and permanent. Perhaps it was reminiscent of my ancestors who perished in the Holocaust. I remember crying after I was tattooed. These were the tiniest specks, literally smaller than a pen mark, to mark the beam of light that the radiation machine would emit. However, it was yet another symbol of how I was no longer the same, and that reminders of the cancer would always be with me. The compassion that was shown to me by the technicians was wonderful. One of the women saw how upset I was, and she tried to comfort me. I joked with her that so many people had seen my boobs, I was going to start charging 50 cents to every spectator. She laughed and replied, "It's only one boob. That's 50 cents. Her humor helped me. It was a small thing, but it was a reminder that the kindness of medical personnel can go a long way. I began my 25 radiation treatments the following week. There was tremendous concern about radiating breasts that had implants in them, as there was a possibility that radiation could destroy the implant or damage the skin too much to enable future implant surgery. The implants that I have are not forever. They have a life expectancy of about 12 years. I was once again terrified. There were not many women who had implants and then underwent radiation, as many women in the past would have had radiation before implants. I felt it a real loss, not knowing anyone who I could talk to about this or reassure me that I'd be okay. Dr. K told me that there was one case he had worked with where a woman developed severe infections and had to have her implants permanently removed. The thought of not being able to have implants and having to one day wear prosthetics was something that was a possibility. It was terrifying and caused me to have to examine my physical identity and perception of beauty all over again. My sense of gratitude for my implants shifted, as I had never realized that there was a possibility that I might not be able to have them. As such, I did everything in my power to hydrate my skin and minimize negative consequences. I religiously applied lotion to my skin and drank gallons of water a day. I was so fortunate and blessed that I fared as well in radiation. All the technicians and doctors still marvel at how my skin doesn't even look like it was radiated. I met a really kind technician named Schmidt, who eventually became my friend. The attitude of the staff helped me enormously. They tried to comfort me and calm me down. Sitting in the waiting room each day was very upsetting, as I was continuously exposed to individuals who were 10 to 20 years my senior, walking with canes and wheelchairs, having no hair and looking frail and sick. The radiology technicians became my new friends, and I began joking with them by singing, "Light 'em Up." My songs, Know What You Did in the Dark by Fall Out Boy, when my radiation began. It then became our mutual mission to create a radiation playlist, if you will. It went as follows. Number 1, I'm on Fire by Bruce Springsteen. Number 2, We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel. Number 3, Burning Down the House by Talking Heads. Number 4, Disco Inferno by the Tramps. Number 5, This House is on Fire by AC/DC. Number 6, Fire by Bruce Springsteen. Number 7, She's on Fire by Aerosmith. Number 8, Just Like Fire by Pink. Number 9, Burn by Ellie Goulding. Number 10, Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis. Number 11, Light My Fire by The Doors. And number 12, Firework by Katy Perry. And after each chapter, I talk a little bit about psychological theory. So one of the things that we know for certain is that humor can really be incredibly protective in cancer. It actually can destroy natural killer cancer cells, can increase immunity, and actually can increase our lifespan. So at the end of each chapter, I talk about psychological theory. Humor and coping have long been researched. Sven Spivak and colleagues evaluated people's sense of humor and found that mortality was reduced by about 20% in Norwegian subjects who reported higher degrees of humorous thinking. They concluded that maintaining a sense of humor not only keeps people healthy, but may also increase their longevity. One study by Noji looked at the physiological effects that humor may have on immune functioning and found that neuroendocrine and stress-related hormones decrease during laughter, thus resulting in improved immune functioning. Another study found that laughter may reduce stress and increase natural killer cell levels, a type of white blood cell that attacks cancer cells. By bringing laughter and humor into our lives, we can actually reduce cancer cells. I just have 1 or 2 small chapters to read, and then we're going to talk about some coping techniques. CAT scan and squats. So after my first cancer, I became so impacted by nutrition and exercise and the power of healing of both that I became a personal trainer. I also became a figure competitor where I stood in stripper heels and a bikini on stage and I flexed my muscles. And so I was really, really into fitness and I had some nice shredded muscles. And so this chapter talks about when I went to the hospital for my first round of chemo. CAT scan and squats. I had my first round of chemotherapy and was experiencing a really bad headache. After it did not remit by the second round, Dr. S told me that he would be remiss if he did not order a CAT scan to make certain there was no metastases to my brain. He told me that the chances of that happening were remote. However, I had already felt as though I should enter the lottery Powerball, as my luck, or lack thereof, seemed to fall in the outlier of percentages. The visceral feeling of sheer terror once again permeating my being. By this point, that terror had become an unwelcome squatter residing in my body, continuously taking up residence, even though I beckoned it to leave. I walked down to the lower basement where I was told to put on the hospital gown. I sat there alone and frightened. Since I had gone to many of my routine appointments by myself, I had to endure a lot of panic alone, relying on my internal resources and ability to cope. There was a very kind woman, probably in her late 20s, who did my intake. She commented that I had great biceps and asked me if I worked out. I told her that in addition to being a psychologist, I had become a personal trainer. She was incredibly complimentary and inquired if I minded if she asked me some questions related to fitness and exercise. Our conversation became relaxed and personal, and she told me how much she admired me and my story. I had already begun to feel much calmer and much more like a person, not just a disease. She walked me into the imaging room where I met two of her colleagues, both women in their late 20s. She told them that I was a personal trainer, and one of them said, "Oh my God, can I ask you? I can't seem to get my butt to stop sagging. What can I do?" The other woman echoed, "Yeah, I go on the treadmill all the time, but it doesn't help my booty." There I was in my hospital gown, about to get a CAT scan to either rule out or confirm the presence of a brain tumor, and I started demonstrating to them how to do the perfect squat, walking lunges, and Romanian deadlifts. For a few brief moments, I became a normal person again, and I was not a cancer patient. I had an identity. I could contribute to others. I had value. I was still a person. Somehow the energy in that room transformed me, and as I lay on the flat and cold metal slab to undergo my scan, I felt supported by sisters. I also felt so built up by their acknowledgement of my physical strength, then I channeled that into emotional strength. Psychological theory. Western medicine has traditionally treated people as isolated entities when people actually exist within a milieu of family, friends, homes, jobs, neighborhoods, geographical areas, and cultural and psychological environments, all of which can influence their health and disease. In 1977, Dr. George Engel proposed the biopsychosocial model of medicine. This was the first paradigm to treat the biological, psychological, and social issues as systems of the body, all of which are interlinked. To this end, more and more research demonstrates that integrative care results in improved health outcomes. Jeremy Hunt from the Department of Health and Social Care in Great Britain says, "Every patient is a person with a name, a person with a family, not just a body harboring a pathology, not a diagnostic puzzle, not a cost pressure." Being recognized and treated as an individual remains important to a person when they become a patient, and in many ways this need is heightened due to feelings of vulnerability. Recognizing individuals within the health service field means acknowledging and understanding their experiences, hopes, and expectations, as well as considering feelings of loss, guilt, or future uncertainty. It also means understanding and responding to the fact that the patient was a person first, and they had a full identity that entailed aspects totally unrelated to sickness and disease. Hippocrates said he would rather know what sort of person has a disease than what sort of disease a person has. And this is my last chapter. And it's very special to me. And if you looked around my office, you see right here sunflowers. They're really special to me. When it came time to treat my cancer, I completely believed in and embraced mind-body techniques. Since I originally began with radiation and wasn't certain that I would even necessitate chemotherapy, I wanted to focus on something related to the radiation killing my cancer. However, all of the images that I could imagine that were similar to radiation, light beams, fire, heat, and capable of destroying cancer cells, reminded me that the radiation itself could harm me. Therefore, I had to come up with another image that helped me. For some reason, I kept thinking about sunflowers. They seemed so strong and beautiful, invincible in some way. They looked like they could take a beating, but still survive. They represented me. A type of sunflower called the girasol literally translates in Italian to turning towards the light. This resonated with me because I wanted to be someone in mind and spirit who always turned towards the light, towards hope, towards a new day. I believed that I had to work hard every day at showing my brain that I would get better, and I did. I surrounded myself with sunflowers. I put giant silk sunflowers in my office. I put metal plant holders that were shaped like sunflowers on my front porch. I had synthetic sunflowers tied to my mailbox. I started signing my texts and emails with sunflower emojis. This has become my symbol, a continuous representation that I will always try hard to turn towards the light, be strong, and not falter. Psychological theory. In the early 1980s, researcher Carl Simonton explored how one's reactions to stress and emotional factors can impact disease, treatments, and outcomes, and how positive expectations, self-awareness, and self-care can contribute to survival. In his groundbreaking book, On Getting Well Again, he focused on the mind-body connection and discussed the importance of utilizing visual imagery with cancer patients. He showed cancer patients what a normal, healthy cell looked like. He then asked the patients to imagine a battle going on between the cancer cell and the normal cell. The patient was asked to visualize a concrete image that would represent the cancer cell and another image of the normal cell. Then the patient was asked to see the normal cell winning the battle against the cancer cell. Utilizing this technique, patients showed a dramatic reduction, if not complete remission of their cancer. Examples of this are the video game Pac-Man eating up the ghosts, or a vacuum cleaning up all the dirt. Never shall we underestimate the power of our own thinking and the way that we can impact our life. So thank you for listening to those intense chapters. I know it's kind of heavy, but there's a lot of power in our minds and coping techniques. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some coping techniques that I have researched. When I was working as a psychologist in the Pediatric Cancer Center, I saw a lot of children who were coping with disease. And at the same time, watching them from a clinical perspective, I was also doing a lot of research on my own in terms of what could help people deal with chronic illness and cancer. So some of the things that I have researched include positive thoughts. So the average human being thinks of approximately 60,000 thoughts per day. And that demonstrates the sheer magnitude of influence we have to harness success and positivity in our own brains. And so much of our experience comes from the way we think about things. Obviously, we can't control what happens to us, but we can control our response to it. So that's a really important mantra to live by for everybody, whether it be cancer or any other adverse life experience. The second coping technique is visual imagery. And we just heard about how patients with cancer envisioned a Pac-Man eating up their cancer cells, right? And so visual imagery is an incredibly powerful tool that we can use for anything. My 17-year-old daughter completely mocks me when I tell her that she is going to take an exam. I tell her to sit and visualize herself kicking butt. But study after study tells us that when you spend time visualizing a successful outcome, you're more likely to have that outcome. Social support, incredibly important to all human beings, but particularly for cancer patients. It has been found to lower depression and anxiety, and particularly with cancer patients, actually impact somebody's survival. That's why Sharsheret is such an important community, because when we're surrounded by people who can share our experience and support us, it's incredibly important medicine. Communication with our healthcare team, really pertinent. Advocating for ourselves and using our voice is really, really important. Knowing our bodies is really important. Being honest with our healthcare team in terms of whether or not we're using recreational drugs, whether or not we're compliant with medication is really important. When I'm working with some people who are taking antidepressant medication in my private practice, they'll reveal to me that they're still feeling depressed. And then when we talk further about some of their behaviors, they'll acknowledge that they're drinking a few times during the week. So they're taking antidepressant medication, and then they're taking alcohol, which is a depressant, right? And so if we're not honest with our healthcare team, we're not going to yield the most effective outcomes. Food and nutrition, really, really powerful medicine. Study after study tells us that food and nutrition in general is important for everybody's health. Studies now talk about gut microbiome and how important that is, not only for our physical health, but for our mental health. And one of the things that I have written about specifically, which I'm really proud about, is this idea of it not just being that important about the foods that we eat, but the thoughts that we have about the foods that we eat. So when we think about exercise, there's something in exercise called the mind-muscle connection. And what that means is that when we think about the muscle that we're working, instead of just lifting a weight, if we actually focus on our bicep as we're doing bicep curls and we think about our bicep getting bigger and stronger, studies show that our bicep will actually grow larger. And so I took the same idea in terms of healthy eating, right? So it's not just about the food that we're eating, it's about thinking about the properties of the food and how it can impact our disease. So one of the things that I think about a lot is broccoli, right? So broccoli is a cruciferous vegetable. And one of the things we know about broccoli is that it removes extra estrogen from the body. So when I'm eating broccoli, I'm like in an altered universe. I'm not just eating broccoli, I'm actually thinking to myself as I'm eating the broccoli that this is reducing my chance of breast cancer recurrence, that I'm actually, doing something very salubrious and healthy for my body, and I'm, increasing my health. So it's very important to not only have these, not only have positive nutrition, but to think about the impact that the food is actually having on your health and your body. Exercise, incredibly important. Women who exercise regularly can expect a 20 to 30% reduction in cancer. And those people who engage in moderate exercise, 30 minutes, 5 times a day, have a dramatic reduction in their breast cancer recurrence. We know that exercise is critical for every single disease, but in addition to disease, it's critical for our minds and for our bodies and just to gain a sense of empowerment. So in terms of this whole mind body thing, I'm often like freak land again when I'm doing my exercise. When I'm doing push-ups, I'm not just doing push-ups. When I'm doing push-ups, I'm employing visual imagery and I'm literally going down on the floor. And for me, as I'm going down on the floor, I think about all of the negative things I've been through. I think about cancer. I think about how cancer kicked my butt. And then I push myself up. And I literally use that experience of physical energy and exercise to literally feel that I am strong. And every time I do one push-up, I'm further and further away from being sick or weak from cancer. So these visual imageries are incredibly important, and studies show that they're really impactful for our health. Touch, really important and all of these coping techniques are important for everything, not just cancer. They're important for our everyday life. They're important for chronic illness, pain, but just to have a happier life. Touch, particularly important for individuals going through cancer who may feel disconnected from their bodies, who may feel not so desirable, right? Or may be really struggling with chronic pain. When somebody is touched, it's reminiscent of earlier attachment patterns between caregiver and infant. And most of those memories are very positive for people. In addition, when we are touched, even when we just pat ourselves, there's a hormone called oxytocin that's released. And oxytocin is a stress reliever, which is why you've heard that when you pet a dog or you pet an animal, your blood pressure decreases and their blood pressure decreases because a hormone oxytocin is released. So even when you're stressed out in regular everyday life, if you just I know this sounds sort of freakish, another thing my daughter would make fun of me for, but if you pet yourself or even nonchalantly, pet your leg or, even hold your hands, you're actually releasing this hormone that is a stress reliever. Humor. Humor is incredibly important. And as I told you, I made a radiation playlist. And I think that it's incredibly important to try and find humor in situations that are upsetting. But in addition to just changing your mood, it stimulates the immune system and counteracts the effect of stress hormones. So can actually make long-lasting changes in your immunity. Music. Music is like the great stuff. And, you can actually channel really beautiful times in your life by creating a playlist of special music. Music can boost your mood. It can help you cope. And music has also been found to increase the number of natural killer cells that increase immunity and decrease cancer cells just by listening to music. So that's really, really powerful. Creation, putting something out into the world. So when you are baking or crafting or pretty much doing anything, you are putting something out into the world and starting anew, right? So in Hebrew, we have the saying tikkun olam, right? To repair the world, right? Sometimes by us doing something, we're changing the world, right? And so even by us doing something as silly as making a cake, we're saying that we are putting effort out, right? That we can continue to contribute. And that's like a really powerful, beautiful thing. Lastly, gratitude. When we think about something that we're grateful for, we actually get a hit of dopamine in our brains, which, and dopamine is the reward center. So studies actually show that every time we find something to be grateful for, our brain starts to look for more things to be grateful for. And gratitude can really reduce our sense of trauma and increase our sense of resilience. There have been many studies done with gratitude, with even people from war. When they have written letters of gratitude or thank you notes to other people, they've showed an increase in resilience and lower PTSD. So even by simply writing a letter of gratitude to somebody, you're increasing positive things for your body. So those are some coping techniques. And in addition to that, we have prayer, which is certainly important to many people. We also have mindfulness. And mindfulness can be many, many things, but a simple act of mindfulness can be engaging 5 senses. When you're stressed or overwhelmed, or even just want to capitalize on the present moment, engaging your 5 senses, looking around, smelling the air, feeling the sun on your face, touching something, eating something. Studies show that it forces us to be present and can actually make us have more meaning from that experience. So those are some coping techniques. I think, Deborah, you were gonna maybe speak about some things or ask some questions or something fun like that.
Absolutely. Yes. So I don't know if you want to give another example, but you had shared that one of the very unique things that you do at the Metamorphosis, I had to practice that word several times today. The Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change is this merging of visual imagery and psychotherapy and exercise. And I think that you gave a couple of examples, but how does that work?
Yeah. So after I've been a psychologist for 20 years. And so while I was, even before I was going through cancer treatment, I had many people that I was seeing who would talk about being depressed and anxious. And especially when I was going through cancer treatment, I really investigated the efficacy of exercise, right? And I saw how much it was helping me. And I started talking to my patients about how they should start doing walking lunges and deadlifts, right? And so people would be telling me all this, and I would start showing them how to do deadlifts, and I'm like, I can't legally be doing this. I need to get some sort of license. So I became a personal trainer, and eventually I opened up a center called the Metamorphosis Center, where I integrate psychotherapy, exercise, and visual imagery. And so one way that might manifest itself with a particular patient would be if somebody presents some sort of issue that they're working on, and how we could utilize visual imagery, psychotherapy, and exercise together. So an example of somebody recently was a woman who was in an extremely competitive job for many, many years. And she felt like it was a really toxic environment for her, and she decided to leave. And she wanted to get in touch with some more benevolent aspects of her soul, and start a new chapter in her life. And so with that theme, we tried together to come up with a visual imagery of what that might look like. And so we started going over to my bench press, which is in my incredibly freaky office here, half psychotherapy, half gym, right? And we went to my bench press, and we took dumbbells that she put towards her core, right? And the dumbbells were representing the place that she was at in this toxic work environment that felt really overwhelming and that she wanted to leave. And so we started working on chest flies. And chest flies, every time she did a chest fly, she would open up and expand into like a butterfly, right? But also expand into these aspects of her personality that she wanted to integrate now into her life. And so it was a very visual experience, which we would also, create verbal mantras where she would come to her core and think about where she was and close her eyes and really concentrate on expanding and integrating all these new beautiful things. So that's just one example of how, exercise, physical, visual imagery can be really powerful, integrating the whole mind body.
Wonderful. I do have another question or two, but if you also have questions as you're listening, you can put them into the chat box and we will be sure to ask them. So throughout your book, and you offer practical advice to how to speak with someone with cancer. Maybe what you say, what you don't say. Do you have any practical words that you can share?
I do. So I think that many people say things that are very well intentioned, but can hit somebody who's going through really any trauma in a negative way. And the intention is always, kind, but I think something that people need to realize is that when somebody is experiencing their own trauma, they have a great they have a difficult time even coping with their own emotions. So it's difficult for them to then deal with somebody else's emotions, right? And so some people who are going through any kind of trauma will choose deliberately who they want to tell something to and who they don't want to tell something to. And the reason for that decision might be that there are certain personalities who may make them feel more anxious, or they may feel like they have to take care of that person's experience of their cancer, right? So one of the most important things is to understand that it's the person's own experience and their story, and that they need to decide who they're going to tell about their diagnosis, what they're going to tell, how they're going to tell, right? And so it can be a really disempowering experience for somebody to have somebody else share their story or the details of their story with somebody else. And one of the things that we know from trauma research is that one of the ways that somebody finds empowerment over their experience is by determining who they tell their story to and when and how. So that's an important thing, to always ask direct permission from somebody about what details you may share. Number two, statements like God only gives you what you can handle. These are very well-intentioned statements, but it really diminishes the pain that somebody is going through, and it somehow also makes them feel that they should be able to handle everything that comes their way, and that if they can't, that they shouldn't really be telling somebody that they're drowning. So that's not always a helpful statement. When you are talking to somebody about their cancer, it's never a good idea to say, oh, I know somebody who died of cancer, right? Like, we need stories of hope. And every cancer is unique and different. And when somebody shares that their great grandmother, died of cancer, you may be a very different person, and you don't really want to hear about other people dying. Another thing is that it's sometimes people, for their own curiosity, want to know what kind of treatment somebody will be getting, but not everybody feels comfortable sharing specific details, maybe perhaps even about their surgery. So I know for me, when I was first, diagnosed and I had to have a double mastectomy, that was like absolutely devastating. And I had so much to cope with my own identity and vulnerability and changing self-esteem and beauty, that I couldn't share that with other people, nor could I tolerate their reactions or their judgment or whatever it was that they were thinking. I couldn't deal with it. And so we need to understand that people may feel very private about that, which is why we need to ask direct permission about what we can share, but also not to burden them with those questions, because they will share what they want to share. Another thing, don't compare cancers. I had many people say to me when they didn't know the specifics of my cancer or my treatment, I had many people say to me, oh, you were so lucky. My friend really struggled because she had a double mastectomy, or she had it so much worse. She had chemo, right? And so cancer's cancer. There's no like prize for who gets the most abuse. And so no comparing cancers. The other statement, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Sometimes we can have tremendous post-trauma growth, right? And really see the world in a new way and grow and transform. And that's a beautiful thing. And I can certainly say that that happened for me, and I'm really grateful for that. But for some people, cancer just sucks. It just traumatizes them. There's nothing great about it. And so this idea, like what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, it doesn't always hold true for everybody. And there also seems to be some pressure that, you know, they need to somehow grow when they're dealing with enough. Let's see, a couple more things. If you don't know what to say, just be present. And sometimes you can say, I don't know what to say. I have a very, very dear friend who, when she doesn't know what to say, she says, I don't know what to say. I don't know what it is that I, can do, but I want you to know that whatever it is, I'm here for you, right? Whatever it is that you need, I'm here for you. So that's really important. Letting somebody know that if they want to cry, if they want to binge watch Netflix, if they want to be moody, that you are just there, to be present and to be with them. And lastly, when people say, whether it's after a death or after cancer or some other adversity, let me know if you need anything. Although once again, that's very well intentioned, it puts the onus to seek support on the person who's struggling. It would be much more helpful to say, can I get your kids from school tomorrow? Can I bring you dinner next week? Right? To offer concrete support so that the person feels, like that they actually can enlist that support. So those are some of the suggestions that I have.
Thank you. At Charcheret, we offer caring community presentations, and Nancy Cohen, who are on our staff, who you know quite well, and I discussed that you could have written our manual basically for how we teach about being a caring community. So thank you. If there are no other questions, I do have one more, but if there are no other questions coming in from the chat box, although there are comments to thank you for sharing your story. One last thing to leave us with before we wrap up is you talk about being an advocate for one's health, mind, and body. Is there something specific that you can name for how to advocate for yourself with your healthcare providers?
Absolutely. So studies show that our relationship to our healthcare team can actually impact our survival. So it's really, really important that we feel that we are with trusted people who care about us. Not everybody has a plethora of choices in their healthcare system, but we often have some choice, right? So it's about figuring out, number one, can I choose a healthcare provider who is going to make me feel like they are a part of my team and that they care about me? That's important. And if you're not experiencing that, see if you can go elsewhere to try and experience it. Number two, to educate yourself about everything related to your disease so that you're empowered with information. The more we know about our treatment and our treatment options and what's happening within our bodies, the better we'll be. Number three, know your body. Right? The second time I had cancer, I'm the one who found this little nodule on my breast. And I went to both my gynecologist and my surgeon, who both told me, don't think it's anything, right? And you have to trust the little voice inside of you that says, this doesn't feel right, right? You know, even though medical professionals have skill and intuition and history, right? We also need to trust our bodies. We also need to be really open and honest, like I had mentioned before, with whatever it is that we are experiencing. Be honest about our symptoms. Sometimes when somebody has had a medical trauma or even an emotional trauma, they have a real reluctance to share certain symptoms with their healthcare team out of fear. We don't want to tell them everything because we're afraid that that one thing might be the thing that, that's bad, right? Or the thing that's going to impact us negatively. But without doing so, we're not, partnering in a relationship that's going to yield the most efficacious results. One of my favorite books when I was first diagnosed was Why I Wore Lipstick to My Mastectomy, right? And so the author, Geraldine Lucas, talked about how she showed up on the day of her surgery wearing lipstick, right? And why did she wear lipstick? Because she was giving a symbol to the doctors saying, I care about myself, I take pride in myself, and I'm important, right? And her lipstick was a symbol that like she wanted other people to take care of her as well. So when we meet a healthcare team and we're about to enter any kind of treatment relationship, it's always important to let them know who you are as a person, that you're not just a patient, right? That you're a mother or you're a wife, or that you're a dancer or an artist. And in so doing, not only do you educate them about your value, but you tell yourself that you're also not just a sick person, which is why I shared that chapter about CAT scan and squats, right? When I was able to help somebody and they were able to see me as a personal trainer who can help them with their booty, right? I had, much more of an important feeling. Don't be afraid to ask your healthcare team for things that you want. When I worked at the Pediatric Cancer Center, we actually had contracts with children where children would write down on lists the things that they wanted. So it could be something as simple as a nurse accessing their Metaport, which is where it's a little pump where they put the needle for the chemotherapy. And so it could be something as simple as, when the nurse gives me my chemo, I want to say 1, 2, 3. Or when they take my blood, I want to play I Spy, or I want to be the one who takes the tape off, when they give me my chemo. It can be something very simple, but we would actually make contracts and it would say Michael's rules, right? And Michael would draw up all the things that were important to him and we would honor them. And so from an adult perspective, when I had surgery, I asked my surgeon during my major surgery if he could play Andrea Bocelli music. Right? I had read studies talking about how we can hear things while we're under anesthesia, and I wanted to hear Andrea Bocelli. He calmed me, right? And so it's asking for things, and when we find healthcare providers who want to partner with us in that way, they're showing us that they care by honoring our wishes. So I think that's pretty much, yeah. I think that, I'm sure there are many more, but those are the ones that I'm kind of thinking about right now off the cuff.
Beautiful, really. Thank you so much for sharing your written words, but for sharing all the additional information, how to speak with those with a cancer diagnosis, how to cope through not just a cancer diagnosis, but everyday life. So many of these coping techniques, the top 11 list that you gave us, in addition to the great songs that inspire or keep us, centered on what it is. I love the visual imagery of the fire and it's burning it out, burning the cancer out. Thank you, Dr. Exelbert. We encourage you to use the energy of Breast Cancer Awareness Month to take action in all of your own health and wellness, to schedule your screenings, to eat well, and to take an extra lap around the block. Thank you again to the Mid-Island-wide JCC for promoting tonight's event, and to Maidenbaum for their dedication to Sharsheret outreach and education programming on Long Island. As we close, I want to remind you that Sharsheret's team is here for you and your loved ones.
We lost your volume.
There we go. Sorry. I just added to the chat box our clinical staff link as well as our website. Sharsheret team is here for you and your loved ones. Sharsheret provides support and programs designed to help navigate one through a cancer experience. All are completely free and private and one-on-one. There is contact information, as I mentioned. Your health and well-being are our priority, and now we have excellent tips and techniques for keeping us strong. Feel free to lean on us and all of these helpful tips from Dr. Exelbert. And remember that Sharsheret is always adding more programs to our website. You can look for things that are in your neighborhood as well as things that are online. Thank you again, Dr. Exelbert, and to all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was trying to wait.
I said you have to listen to this if you.